So on this channel, we often cover the issues that we see in the current media climate, whether it's how spiteful the people behind these shows seem to be, or forcing their own narratives into these already existing IPs, and the unfortunate us versus them mentality that tends to arise from this kind of climate. It seems like The Acolyte from Disney Plus is the latest property to fall into this trap. This isn't exclusively a Disney problem, we've been seeing it across many forms of media, but I think Disney is a great example of why this isn't working, and the effect this mentality is having on both the industry and audiences. Disney's run on Star Wars has largely been a mess. We have gotten some really awesome shows like Andor, which I would highly recommend, but the vast majority of them have been letdowns. And I think a major problem is that Disney has lost its way, not just with Star Wars, but overall. Over the company's long history, they had a major female audience. Their animated movies weren't exclusively for women, and some were very popular with boys like Aladdin or Hercules, but the majority were still women, and they found major success with their Disney Princess line, but they were looking for a new way to expand their audience, and decided the best way to go about it was to acquire different properties that already had a male audience, which led to them buying Marvel and Star Wars. Disney had the resources to build up these brands, and the MCU was very successful for a long time. They set an industry standard with these crossover movies, and it's something that many other companies tried to replicate but failed, because they just couldn't get that formula down. So for a while they were dominating, but then they started listening to the activists who'd been giving them criticism for a while now, as in decades. Disney and other companies and media franchises, including things like comic books and video games, had been getting pushback for the way they portray their characters and narratives, insisting that they were problematic and needed to be fixed.
The princess problem. A Bay Area author is in the midst of a tiara tiff. She says the focus on little girls role-playing as princesses could have a harmful long-term impact on the women they eventually become.
Of course, they also got funding from giant companies like BlackRock and Vanguard, which gave these companies the incentive to make these kinds of projects. So they started making shows and movies with a heavy emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while that in and of itself is not a problem, companies have been using their progressive themes as a way to deflect criticism, to the point where they'll shout down anyone who takes issue with their projects, even if it's valid criticism. Then there's the way they approach making these characters and telling these stories. Most of these leads end up falling into two archetypes, girl boss or adorkable, which leaves them feeling very one-note or underwhelming tokens. Meanwhile, the narrative includes lecturing the audience about the creator's narratives, and interacting with strawmen who sometimes end up being more likable than the main character, or at least in the right even though the narrative is treating them like they're in the wrong. It's very ironic. Like Asha from Disney's Wish having an overly quirky personality, and them cutting out Starboy as her love interest, and love interests are something that we haven't seen in over a decade at this point. Meanwhile, in The Acolyte, they have a habit of propping up the female characters while putting down the male characters, which is a pitfall we unfortunately see a lot when it comes to representation-based media, where in order to uplift one group, they often have a habit of putting down another, which leads to a lot of awkwardness and resentment from audiences. When making these videos, I always try to offer some kind of solution, or pointing to examples of similar works that end up being effective, whereas the main topic, in my opinion, fell short. Like giving some examples of self-inserts I thought worked, or comparing Sweet Baby Inc. to The Buy Guide, both of which are third-party consulting agencies, but one was incredibly successful and benefited the company they were working with, to the point where they increased their profits tenfold, while the other only found the ire of basically the entire gaming community. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was an absolute disaster. There were those who were trying to downplay it, but there's no denying it. I have a whole video on this if you're interested, but it was offensively bad. I think it's ironic that in Kim Belair's presentation, she was talking about how if they don't hire Sweet Baby Inc., imagine what they would say on Twitter, only for social media to have the exact opposite reaction to Sweet Baby Inc.'s contributions. I think another major issue is that they expect people to automatically turn up to their projects just because they have a diverse character as the lead. It's gotten so prevalent that even South Park talked about this. They have a Cartman-Kathleen Kennedy hybrid who goes on and on about how she wants everything to have a chick in it and to make her lame and gay.
Put a chick in it and make her lame and gay!
Sure, yeah. Well, let's try that.
again.
I want to ask you both because this is, I would say, arguably the gayest Star Wars, I think, by a considerable margin.
Oftentimes, that's about where the diversity begins and ends. They'll just proclaim how progressive they're being, and then spend the runtime lecturing the audience and other characters about their own worldview instead of including storytelling that would attract diverse audiences. Since we were just talking about Sweet Baby Inc., let's use them as an example. One of the most controversial scenes in that game was a Suicide Squad killing Batman, who is A, the main protagonist from the previous installments, and B, voiced by a beloved and longtime actor for Batman who recently passed away, making this his last role. But instead of giving him a respectful send-off, they lecture him about how much of a failure he is before shooting him in the head. The narrative wants us to be on Harley's side, but it's not surprising that fans had such a visceral reaction to this. Sweet Baby Inc. insists that they're dedicated to diversity and expanding their audiences, but how was any of this actually supposed to appeal to diverse audiences, let alone a general one? These stories can also be really preachy, and it gets to a point where it feels like they're just talking down to us. Instead of just letting these characters speak for themselves by having cool stories, they have to constantly harp on the fact that they're diverse, which just brings more attention to it, and not in a positive way because the writing isn't strong enough to back it up. And it's a shame because now we're starting to see audience members become more jaded, some even admitting that they're not willing to engage with media that has diverse characters at all, pretty much writing all of it off as DEI. This comment was referring to a game called Tales of Kenzera Zao. There's been an active boycott against anything related to Sweet Baby Inc., and this is one of the games that was targeted. The game is based in the creator's Kenyan roots. Abu Bakar Salim is actually a pretty prominent voice actor, having voiced characters like Bayek from Assassin's Creed Origins, and he decided to make his own video game, which was a passion project for him after having lost his father. Despite being an original IP with unique characters, it still got a lot of backlash. People looked through his past and discovered that he had been associated with Sweet Baby Inc., causing the game to land on the boycott list, even though it's its own original IP and isn't forcing anything since it's based in its own folklore, with its own original characters. But there are those that insist that everything is pandering, even if that's not actually the case. Another example of this would be Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes. Eiyuden Chronicle is an RPG that was funded through Kickstarter. There was a lot of hype surrounding the game, and it met all of its crowdfunding stretch goals. However, there were some who took issue with its marketing, insisting that the game had compromised writing and designs. Their evidence being one of the characters that was being promoted was a black woman with natural hair. Her name is Marissa. When I asked if that was really their problem, the response I got was yes, unashamedly and unironically.
Are you serious?
They insisted her inclusion was nothing more than cheap pandering to Western audiences, who were forcing their ideals onto Japanese developers. However, this is all a pretty bad faith reading of the situation. During the Kickstarter, they realized that they had a large Japanese and English-speaking audience. The game has over 100 characters the player can recruit, so they thought it would be fun to have the audience members decide which 3 characters they liked the best. And they posed the question to both markets. The Japanese audience picked 3 anime boys, while the American audience chose a shark man, a wolf man, and Marissa. These 6 characters won those polls. So as the game progressed in development, they started pushing these characters, particularly 2 of the anime boys that Japan picked, and the 3rd character being the only human that the American audience picked, which frankly I think makes sense. These 3 also went on to become the main protagonists of the game, so the developers specifically asked the audience members which characters they wanted to see, and then put them at the forefront. That's not pandering. Personally, I think it's great that the developers took the time to listen to their fans, and even included them in the development process. I think many companies could benefit from doing something like this too, taking the time to listen to their audience instead of worrying so much about their anti-audience. And the game went on to receive critical success, on top of having an incredibly successful Kickstarter. That's awesome. At the end of the day, most people just want a fun and engaging story, whether it's a TV show or a movie or a video game, with good and complex characters regardless of what that character is, be it a human or a shark person. But these large companies that are being driven by activists are usually just poisoning the well, and oftentimes their intentions feel inauthentic, like they're more interested in virtue signaling or just forcing their rather spiteful ideas onto the audience. And now we're seeing a retaliation that's honestly just as annoying, whether it's Mr. Bircham by the Daily Wire, or people who are rallying against actually good games. Either way, it's pretty obvious that people are tired of all this, and Spite has created this divide that's not productive. It's a real shame, but that's all just my opinion. What do you guys think? Are you sick of this whole culture war thing? I know I am. Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Equestron, Norman Sweet Cream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Lucas Geist, Jay Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Jinke Z, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Crimson Phantom, Dakari the Professor, Lil, Datadyne Executive, and Owen Wildish. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have a Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. If you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. And that part's free. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.